Good evening, this is woodblock printmaker Dave Bull here at my carving bench in the back room of our Asakusa shop. Some months ago, I did another video while sitting here and telling a story. That was about the old carver, Mr. Ito Susumu. From whom I learned some very interesting things about carving. During the course of telling that story, I happened to mention an episode where I had to restart a printmaking project where I had to carve a key block all over again for the second time. That's going to be the focus of tonight's story. Although to get to that point, it's going to take a while, and I've got to start a little bit farther back. How far back, we'll see. The story, I guess, actually starts in the 1980s, the late 1980s, when my printmaking hobby, as it was at that time, was gradually changing into a printmaking business. The first project I took on when I decided to start selling prints was a bit of a... It was just crazy to try it. I took what was called the Hyakunin-issue, Japanese poetry series, 100 poems by 100 people, excuse me, and I decided to make a series of 100 prints based on that. And it seems like a bit of a crazy idea, but there were many things in mind. One of them was I thought I'd be able to get quite a lot of media attention for it, to try and get the business up and running. And that really, really worked. I got lots of attention, I got some collectors right at the beginning, and honestly speaking, if I hadn't tried such a crazy project, I don't think I'd still be where I was today, actually making a living at this. But anyway, be that as it may, the project itself had some really good points and some really bad points. As I mentioned, it brought lots of media attention. The prints themselves were beautiful. They were very collectible because people loved the Hyakunin-issue. But it had a real downside. Because I was making a series, 100 prints based on the same theme, and one that took 10 years nonetheless, it meant I had to stick to the same technical points for 10 years. Gradations hadn't been invented when I did that series. So for 10 years, I did no gradations. There were no background colors to that series. So for 10 years, I didn't get the experience of printing wide, flat colors. Now, it all went very well, as I said, but I tell you, by the time that 10 years was coming to an end, as happy as I was, and as much time as I had spent learning some basics, I was really ready to try a whole bunch of different techniques. So I came up with the idea of flipping almost exactly the other way around. I made a series of what's called the Surimono albums. It was 5 albums, each one with 10 prints inside. A 5-year project. And each and every one of those prints was selected with one thing in mind, to give me the chance to try a new technique that I hadn't done before. Of course, it might be something simple like gradation. It might be embossing, karazuri. The list went on and on and on. I didn't think so much about the collectors, the people who were collecting these things. I thought about my own, selfish I guess, I thought about my own technical development. And anyway, of course, because I was doing that, because I was very, jumping here and there to take prints from different eras, the print series themselves became quite interesting. I had collectors through the course of the 5 years, and I was able to continue to make a living. And the goal really worked. I know in that previous video I mentioned the fact that I really hadn't had a chance to spend much time with craftsmen. Matsaki-san, the printer I mentioned. Got a catch in my throat tonight, sorry. Matsaki-san, the printer I mentioned there, did help me quite a bit, but he doesn't know much about these techniques that I tried in this Surimono album. And as I mentioned, I had trouble getting carvers to help me. So this series of 50 prints was my attempt to create my own teacher, to go back to these old prints and learn from them what I could. And the 5 years, again, it worked really, really very well. I came out of that series of 50 prints, and I've got printmaking skills that very other men in this country have. Not because I'm better than they are, but because as hired guns, they have no choice to do such interesting work. They just sit at their benches waiting for whatever the publishers send them. And if the economy is how it is, and maybe expensive prints that take too many details to print don't sell, that kind of work is not done, and the printers don't get a chance to practice that. But because I was doing it myself, I was able to stretch out and try all those different techniques. It's a little bit like we mentioned in that last story. Remember, Ito-san said, you're not a craftsman, you're a hobbyist. And part of that was true in that I was able to choose things for myself rather than being assigned the work. Anyway, I can see if I'm not careful, this is going to really randomly go too far. The main point is what's coming up. The next series I made after that. We'd done 10 years on one theme. We'd done 5 years of 50 different prints to challenge my abilities. Okay, it was all there in one piece. So what do I do with these abilities? And I came up with the idea of making a series of 4 prints. There would be 3 months for each of the 4 prints, based on using originals from different eras. The first print would be an original from the Heian era. There was no prints back then, but an original might be a theme from the Heian era. Then from the Edo era, then the Meiji era, then the modern era. Now when you speak of things in 4s, of course, you wrap seasons in with it, so it was a print that also had meaning for spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And it was the series that I called Beauties of 4 Seasons. Each of the prints featured a beautiful woman from that era and from that season. 3 months at a time. The first one, on schedule, on time, took me January, February, March. It was a beauty from the Heian era. It was work more difficult pretty much than anything I'd ever tried before at that time. And it came up pretty well. I used a bunch of metallic pigments. I don't know if that's going to show in this video. There was deep, rich embossing. I was very, very happy with it. So far, so good. Moving on to the summer print. The design, keeping the theme, it was an Edo era print. The design was from the Edo era and Tomaru Bijinga. And for this one, I took an original from, I think it's the Guimet Museum. I should have looked first before I started doing this talk. From a French museum. Traced it onto paper. Got a beautiful woodblock that I'd been saving for years and had a go at carving. Not the smallest hair I could have possibly have carved, but beautifully shaped, smooth hair. And the interesting point about this one, I don't know if you can see this black block, was that the hair on this print is carved twice. Every hair coming on her face fades into nothing, and each one over the top of it has a darker hair that's coming in, fading into nothing as it goes down to give a beautiful gradated effect. So the face had to be carved with all the hairs once, and then a second block carved on top of that with the hairs to match one by one by one. 2004, so I must have been about, what, 52 years old, I don't know, and my eyes were already, whatever, couldn't do it. So I very much needed this lens. It's perhaps the first prints I made through the use of a lens, and since that time I've depended very much on the use of lenses and special glasses. Anyway, those 2 prints came and went very well. The autumn print, I said it had to be based in the Meiji time. And this is not my print, this is an original. This is the original that I reproduced. It's what we call a kuchi-e. A kuchi is the Japanese word for mouth picture. And what that means, the word we use in English, is frontispiece. Magazines of this day, excuse me, they were now starting to be printed by mechanical means, metal type. But to help sell the thing, publishers had the idea that they could make it a bit more attractive by putting a woodblock print in the front of it. And they called them kuchi-e, frontispieces. This one is a fairly simple example. They became really pretty spectacular. There was some just astonishing work. This is by an artist called Kajita Hanko, and I thought I would challenge this one for the autumn print. Now before we look at my print and before we hear the story about why I had to end up carving it twice, which you know where we're going, let me give you a little bit more background about these kuchi-e. These prints were printed at that time when things were really changing a great deal in Japan. The West was pouring into the country, printing presses, technology, things like that were coming in here. The ukiyo-e was pretty much dead. Nobody was interested in those old kabuki pictures anymore. As far as technical things were happening, because the printing presses were here, it did a very interesting thing to the old woodblock printing workshops. Imagine a workshop of the old days. There's people at the top end making masterwork with tomorrow prints, and then there's people making different levels of prints right to the bottom where there's kids who just started last week printing, you know, food wrappers and stuff like that. There's a mix of all different kinds of work from different parts of society. A kid would start, and right away on his first day, you can print food wrappers on your first day, so the kid is productive right from day one. Doesn't earn much money, but he earns something. The kids who had better skills and were able to learn more, they moved up the ladder, got a bit of a simpler job, a postcard, this or that. And there was a whole ladder, a whole pyramid of different levels of work available, and each guy just worked up to the level that he was capable of doing. Bring in the printing presses now, and what happens to that stuff? Of course, nobody hires carvers and printers to do food wrappers. Bang, the food wrappers are done by printing presses. So the printing presses destroyed that job from the bottom up. There was still work at the top for guys making beautiful ukiyo-e reproductions and things like that. because the top craftsman couldn't be duplicated by the printing presses. But the whole bottom of it was gutted. So you had suddenly a situation where there was no more work for apprentices, no more work for beginner level people, no more work for intermediate people. That means the workshops didn't all die straight away in one day, but it meant the handwriting was on the wall. With only the top guys left working and no young people coming into the business whatsoever, it's game over. And there was a window of opportunity. I don't know the exact dates. We're looking at somewhere in 1895 to about 1910, 1915 or so, when there was enough of those old guys still available who could make beautiful, spectacular prints. They hadn't all retired or died yet, and they were desperate for work. Desperate for work. There was nothing going on. No new kabuki pictures being printed. So the publishers, some publishers, saw this opportunity and came up with the idea of doing these woodblock printed frontispieces for the magazines. It's a bit of a sad story, you know. People bought the magazines just for the story. It was dramatic, melodrama type stories or whatever. And honestly speaking, most of those magazines must have been simply read and tossed aside. Some of the kuchi-e would have been taken out before the magazine was tossed aside. Some of them wasn't. So the work of those men, the top level craftsmen of all that period, 1895 or so, survives to us now in the kuchi-e that we've got left behind. Where am I? I get my stream here. Okay. Now, there's two really big mysteries about these kuchi-e prints. They are woodblock prints, you know. When you look at the back of them, you can see barren marks rubbing like this. Some of them do seem to be a mixed media. There might be collotype base for the key lines, then printed with the color lines on the back. There's different types of technology being mixed together here. But a huge mystery is how they were able to make so many copies, and yet these are handmade woodblock prints. And what I mean is this: these magazines were published, people have the records of this, sometimes 10,000 copies, 15,000 copies, 20,000 copies, on like a 2-week or 1-month schedule. And when you do the math, how long it takes a guy and 2 assistants or whatever in a workshop printing these things, rubbing the back, 5 seconds, 5 seconds, 5 seconds, it's not even close. It doesn't add up. If you think about printing presses running bang, 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 that's possible. But these things are rubbed on the back with a barren, one by one by one. And the numbers of colors are spectacularly large. It doesn't add up that a single workshop would be able to do these things. Mystery 1. Mystery 2. This is really fun. I'm going to have to show you some close-ups here. The kuchi-e were in such large quantities, it's possible, you know, to collect maybe multiple copies of the same one. I'm not even going to try and show you that far. We'll look at the camera later. You get something like this. I've got the same print 3 times. Get my lens out, and I look at it, and a very crazy thing. The key lines, which look at these things, and they match absolutely identically down to microscopic levels. Now, some of these have what's called scratch carving, where you've carved a line, you tick, 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 attack it, and it sort of makes it into random dots. If you'd ask 2 men to carve this print, they can get close to it, but they're not going to attack those random dots the same. So if you look at it later under a microscope, you'll see version A and version B. Every single copy of the same image that we get here is clearly from the same key block, because those random dots match exactly. But the color blocks are clearly and absolutely different. The leaf shapes here are carved quite at different shapes. The flower shapes are carved quite differently. It's the same key block, but different color blocks. Now, if it was replacement from wear, the other way around. The key block is the one that wears away first. So if you had a set of prints, maybe the key block wore out, carve another key block, away you go. But this is the other way around. There's no way the color blocks would wear out and need to be carved without the key block showing the slightest bit of wear. It doesn't make sense. The only way that this could possibly have worked is that there were multiple block sets with the same key block. Okay, you start to put 1 and 1 together, 2 and 2 together, and things like that. You can think of a way it might be done. If there was a way that someone would carve a key block, I'll use this small postcard print I made years ago as an example. Imagine this. There was a way you could carve the key block, and before you started printing, suppose there was a way you could clone this. 1, 2, 3. Send it to workshop A, workshop B, workshop C with some guide. Here, guys, carve your color blocks, give me 10,000 copies. Color blocks 10,000, color blocks 10,000. Inside of 2 weeks, you've got your 30,000 copies of the print from 1 carved key block, but you need a way to clone it. Turns out there is a way to do that. It was developed in the West back in the middle 1800s or something. And it was done for reproducing illustrations for newspapers. People would carve, it wasn't the Japanese style carving, it was working with burans and stuff, wood engravings. And they would make a wood engraving, and then through what's called the electrotype process. Now you've heard of electroplating, where you get a trumpet or whatever and you plate it with silver. You've got a silver trumpet, you've got a metal base, and you put something on top of it through electrolytic action. It's possible to do this. You take a carved object, you get some kind of thing like wax or something, and a top fairly firm wax, and you press it in under quite a heavy press. Bang! Pull it up, and you've now got a shell, a female copy of the male lines that are here. You dust this with graphite powder, then you put it in one of those electrical tanks with a copper plate and anodes and cathodes and put the electricity on it, and the inside of that wax gets coated with a very thin, fine shell of copper. It's so thin it's like aluminum foil. If you picked it up it would crumble. But right there inside the wax, you pour something firmer into the back of it, melt the wax off, and you have a duplicate of this block. I searched around the net for this. This was back in 2003 when I was first trying to figure out how to do this. And there was a company in Indianapolis at that time. They're long gone. I think his name was Phil Johnson. And he was experimenting with this. And I got in touch with him with email. And he said, I'll give this a try. And I sent over this block that had been used the year before for one of my New Year's cards. If it turned out to get destroyed, no big deal. I'd already sent out my 200 New Year's cards. And a few weeks later, back from Phil comes this. It's an electrotype of that block. And again, I'll have to use the camera close up to show you later. And it is microscopically identical. The scratch marks of my chisels reproduced. The little chips and pops and cracks, everything microscopically have been reproduced. If there was a bacteria walking around on mine at the time he did it, it must have been reproduced in this one. It is absolutely microscopically reproduced. And that seems to be what these guys have done with the kuchi-e. The key block was carved, dubbed off, how many times, I don't know, at least 3 times. I've got this one with 3, maybe it was 4 or 5, I just haven't come across another copy yet. Dub it off into metal blocks, send them out to different workshops, carve your color blocks, guys, give me your 10,000 copies or whatever, and come back. And I think that's exactly what's happened. There's small, tiny color variations in the different versions. Different people did their coloring a little bit differently. The leaf shapes are a little bit carved different shape, but the key block lines are absolutely, totally identical. Okay, keep that in mind now. Dave comes along in the fall of 2003. Making his kuchi-e reproduction. Now, there's a few things involved here. I had never, ever, ever tried work that was as difficult as this. And again, I'll have to use the camera close up later. There's places on here where the hairs are crisscrossed like this. In some of the older prints, there might be a mosquito screen or something where they would carve the horizontal lines on one and the vertical lines on another one and print them like that. It's easy to carve. This is not that kind of thing. These are all on one block. I looked at it. Can I do this? Give it a try. Now, as you know, you've probably heard before, my prints are mostly carved on cherry wood, and the key block is done on hard cherry. But in cases where there's a really, really, really fine line, cherry doesn't cut it. Excuse me again. Cherry doesn't cut it, and the wood for boxwood is used. So for the key block for this one, I prepared carefully a blank block. I routed out from the wood the area where the head was going to go, and I put in a piece of boxwood at that point. Put down my master, which I'd traced, and then prepared it and carved it. And the head was carved on the boxwood, and the body lines carved on the cherry. Just at this time, actually, NHK had been chasing me for a TV program. And I think I'd been busy that summer, so I'd said no, but they pushed and pushed. And they wanted me to do a program for their educational channel, a little 15-minute mini documentary. David, you got to do it for the kids, you got to do it for the kids. So I did, but the problem was they wanted to show the whole process of making this print, which is not something I could do for them in one day. So they came back again and again and again, day after day after day, and get the lights ready and get this ready, and it's just... And I got out of time, trouble, and there was a guy, an Italian-American guy, who had asked to come over, and I was dumb and said yes, and he was living there, and we're practicing prints together. And one thing and another, this three-month schedule started to push farther and farther and farther back. So I was a bit under time pressure. I got it done. I know the guys in the TV program had sort of, got involved in the work as I was doing this. You know, they hadn't known about it when they came. Just, can we show your work? What's going on? But as they saw what I was doing, the fact that I've been reproducing a kuchi-e, which had never been done before through the 20th century, and all this scratch carving, kasure, it's called in Japanese, and they decided to make that the theme of the program. This guy challenging this thing that had never sort of been done before in many, many, many years. And my problem was that I didn't know how to do this. You can look at the old prints, there's the scratch carving, but how do you actually do that? And there's nothing left behind. You know, I've got you know, a book here. This is published by the Smithsonian Printing Office or something in 1894. It's America. Whatever, we should talk about it in more detail in another video, but it's a chance. They had an exhibition of Japanese prints there, and they had asked the Japanese side, give us some technical information on the prints, and the Japanese side had sent that over. So a lot of Meiji era information is captured as a snapshot in this little book. And it mentions this scratch carving. Unfortunately, it simply mentions it. It doesn't talk about how it was done. So whatever, it's reverse engineering. I can see the kind of pattern that's on the original. I've got my block, and I have a go at trying to figure this out. I get a test block to try some. I carve some lines, try tapping on them with different knives. And I figured out, after some testing, I figured out a way that I could actually try and do this. And I went ahead with it. The NHK guys are filming this super close up and stuff like that. And then they come back one day when I'm all done, and they say, let's do the test printing of this thing. And I'm a bit whatever, because I don't really know how this is going to turn out. But they had asked me, don't put ink on that block. We want to catch the first time when ink is going onto this block. So we did. I left it till they came back. There's the white clean block, and as they were watching, splash the ink on, rub it, and pull off the test sheet. And they put the camera close up on my face while I inspect this thing, and I'm kind of happy. It looks like scratch carving. You know, it wasn't quite exactly the same taste as the one that's in the original, but I could see that I was on the right track. And if I just tried a bit more and a few variations, I'd be pretty close to it. And some of the places need to be carved down a little bit thinner. But I was there. I was up and running. And then I made a huge, huge mistake. Because I'd been researching these kuchi-e and trying to think about how they were made, this story about the metal blocks and stuff. At that point, when I finished my key block, I thought, you know, wouldn't it be fun if, to confirm my theory, even though I already had one with a smaller version, to confirm my theory about these kuchi-e, let's send my block off to the guy in America and duplicate it. There was no need for me to make 3 sets of color blocks, but let's just duplicate that key block so you'll be able to show people and talk about this later on. So what I did was, I did what's called the kyogozuri, the color separations. I took a print of this key block for each one of the colors, colored in, that's going to be blue, that's going to be purple, got some blank wood, pasted those all down. I think it was 5 blocks both sides, a couple of weeks work. Color block carving is ready to begin. Okay, I took the key block, wrapped it up, sent it off to the guy in Indianapolis. Here you are, it's another one, just do what you did before. Thank you very much. I get busy on the color blocks. Marco's there, he's doing his stuff. We're working together on the different projects that come in. The package comes back. You know where this is going because I gave you the punchline at the very beginning. I open the thing. Actually, I didn't prepare it. Let me go and get it. Excuse me a second. Where am I? I went to get that block, but I can't remember exactly what I said. Anyway, the package came back. Is at the point where I left off a minute ago. The block, which I'd carefully carved with the boxwood insert and the cherry wood lines, had gone off. And when I first opened it, there was the block that I'd sent, and there was the new metal reproduction plate. And again, as I said with the previous one, absolutely microscopically perfect in every single detail. But what he had done was, for some reason, I have no idea why, when he did the wax or whatever this thing, he'd put his pressure on, he had used an immense pressure. And these blocks are cherry wood on a plywood base. And I don't know if you can see it from there. Again, I'll show you later on. Under the pressure, the plywood inside had buckled in places. And instead of being a flat surface now, this thing has buckled down, and what we've actually got is a really deeply wavy concave surface in places, 2 or 3 millimeters in. And because that happened at the point where they were taking their master impression, The metal plate that they made is of course also completely buckled, completely useless for printmaking. It makes a nice demonstration of the duplication process, but here we go. I was hosed. Customers are waiting, the collectors are waiting for their 3 months print. I've got the color blocks already carved and waiting now, and I have to go back and make another key block. That's sort of, as I mentioned in the previous video, okay Dave, no problem, turn up, just go ahead, do your job again, pretend you're a craftsman and go ahead and do this. But it's not so simple. When you're carving a normal key block, you don't carve exactly, microscopically exactly on the line. If you do that, you get a real hard, mechanical type of line. The lines are drawn on your master copy and you carve freely somewhere along the line. It's much more important to get the curve and the feeling and the feeling than it is to get the exact on the line. And then when you take that key block you've carved freely like this and make color blocks, the color blocks of course match because you are now transferring your key block to the color blocks and you carve what you see there. But now I had a set of color blocks already carved. I could take my original master copy and go back there, but I now no longer have that freedom to carve this way or that way. I now have to carve this time exactly mechanically to match the color blocks that already exist. So it was a real conundrum, a real paradox. How to get the smooth flow and yet how to match those color blocks. Anyway, whatever, I pasted it down, and as I described in the previous video, had to go at carving it. Trying to keep in mind, Dave, this is your first chance to level up, to do something the second time and try and do a better job. And actually too also, because I had so much practice now at carving this scratch carving, the second block did come out quite a bit better than the first one. But I'm getting a tiny bit ahead of myself. Another problem for that, in that when I did the first one, I had prepared the wood months in advance. But now suddenly I had to do the second one. I had no wood for this. A wood with a piece of boxwood, is set into the thing at the right place. So I'm scrambling around, and what I had to do was, I took the Utamaro print that I had just finished, and it had one unused face on it. So for the back side of one of those Utamaro blocks, I carved the body of the key block of this kuchi-e. Now the head I couldn't do because this is only cherry. It's not strong enough for that. And I then had a piece of boxwood separately for the head. Now, if someone like you hasn't done printing, looking at this, you might think, oh my God, this is all broken. How can you do this? But it doesn't matter for us. We can split stuff up into as many blocks as we want. As long as we put registration marks on them, we can print them separately and they all come together in the finished print. We normally do it anyway. Key block followed by colors. In this case, the key block just simply became two impressions. The body lines first and then the head. It came out very well. Very nice. I'm a little terrified that this thing might split, because boxwood is extremely hard and extremely dry. And this thing doesn't get printed. It's just been sitting in my closet now for years and years and years. And if it doesn't get printed soon, it's quite possible it will just sort of age and split. I'm getting a bit ahead of my story. The 200 or so prints that I made that year, here we are. The 200 or so prints that I made that year are now all gone. The set, as it is, the Beauties of Four Seasons set, I sold about 100 copies that year. And then later on I broke it up and did the summer print separately and the autumn print separately. That was part of our Kickstarter campaign 2 years ago. When you see, my version and the Meiji one side by side, there's a few things to say. It's kind of interesting, if I show people in the shop just my version by itself and people look at this, it's masterful. You look at the lines, oh my God, how can anybody carve so delicate? How can anybody carve so fine? It's very satisfying to do this. It looks wonderful. But I'm quite honest with this. And I show people, actually, I've got a little folder with both side by side. And I show people also, I show them one of these Meiji originals. And when you put them side by side, there's some really interesting differences. Then you can see where I fall down compared to the old carvers. My carving on this hair, for example, on her face, it's straight and fine and clean. And this guy, every one of those hairs has a bit of a different thinness or thickness. There's a bit of taste, there's a bit of twist, there's a bit of defect. They have much more real feeling than mine do. Mine are pretty good, but there's no question that his are better. And my excuse, I don't know if I need an excuse, but my excuse is simple, you know. This guy, excuse me, this guy who carved this, totally unknown, unnamed man, he was a carver. He just carved. He started as a young guy, 10, 12, 14 years old, worked in a carving workshop under a strict master. Not many holidays, didn't get paid very well, just carved. Guys who couldn't hack it fell by the wayside. He ended up being good at it. So it's a lifetime of, I can't say dedication, but a lifetime of practice and skill there. And for me, I carve, I print, I do computer programming, I mess around with YouTube videos, I run a business. You know, the concentration is not there. So I have no bad feeling about this. And considering what other stuff I do, considering what else I get into, I'm quite happy with the kind of work I'm doing. Now, this was 2004. And okay, I'm bragging about my skill. I was really, really good at this. That was 2004. Here we are now in 2017, and my schedule is kind of different. I now have 18 employees. I've got this shop, Mokohankan. There's an old, it's a semi-joke or a parable or story, whatever. I think it's attributed to Jascha Heifetz, or one of these old musicians. It's about working and practicing and stuff. I don't know the exact words, it's just paraphrased. He said, if I miss a day of work and practice, I can feel it the next day. He says, my playing is, you know, not quite up to it. He said, if I miss 2 days, the other players in my quartet, they're looking at me, you know, what's going on, guy? He said, if I miss 3 days, then in the audience, something's going on. The audience, people can see it. And there was a joke, I guess he said, that if I miss a month, the critics start to notice. Something like that, whatever. Now look at me, I'm missing years now. Day by day goes on when I don't get to my bench, my carving bench. It's quite possible, you know, I don't really want to sort of face this idea. It's quite possible that perhaps I'm already retired now. Perhaps I will never, ever again make a print as good as this. I really don't want to think so. I'm kind of hoping somehow I can get my life organized and get a manager here or get different people work to do these jobs and get back to this carving bench, you know, because this is really, I think, this is where I belong. This is where I have fun. This is where I do stuff that pretty much nobody else on this planet can do, you know. How can I organize my time to get back here? I don't know. It's not given up, you know. And some of you know there is actually a project on my bench here. I'm supposed to not to be able to show this. It's a print involving an octopus, and I've started carving. And the one corner of it here is finished, carving some seaweed and stuff like this. And it's coming along kind of nicely. The only time I get for it is the kind of time that I'm using right now for this video. The shop is closed. I've had a light dinner, spent a couple of hours doing something before going to bed. And tonight it's video. Tomorrow night maybe it'll be a bit of carving on this print. But that's where I've come to now, you know, just grabbed and snatched a couple of hours or an hour a few days a week to do this. There's people waiting for this. It's going to take a little while to get out there, and I'll try and video some of it as I go along. And hopefully one day, shouldn't be too long, I'll be able to sit here again, put the mic on, start the camera up, and tell you the interesting story about the problems I had while making this print. Will we get that far? Search me. Thank you very much for listening tonight. It's really been another ramble. I'm sorry, but what can I say? Thank you again, and see you next time.